it doesn't start recording for a second too. So,
okay.
So wait. Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one giant book, break it down section by section, bit by bit, talk about it, analyze it, have fun, make jokes, do entertaining things. This season, the 10th season, we are doing Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. And today's episode, we're covering specifically up to page 776. As always, I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I am not joined by Brian Wood this time. Brian is not available tonight, but in his place, we have a special 2-guest episode. So Rebecca Hussey is the first guest who writes for BookRiot. You also have a PhD and professor at Norwalk Community College, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And you like riding your bike, which I need to talk to you about.
Excellent.
Because I ride my bike constantly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's my favorite summertime activity here.
I was just riding this morning. It's also my favorite wintertime activity.
I'm too scared here in Rochester. It's a little crazy to begin with, and riding in the snow with these people that drive like this, not great.
We also need to talk about Rochester because I grew up in and outside of Rochester.
What?
Yeah.
Where at?
Well, I lived like near Kodak up until I was 11, and then we moved out to Wayne County. So I spent my teen years in Marion in Wayne County.
Oh, I know that. I've never been there, but I know that town.
Yeah, there's no reason to go there.
Fair. Up by Kodak is one of those areas that's trying to be revitalized now too.
Yeah. I was there, just when I was a kid. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, and also our second guest today is Josh Cook, who is a bookseller at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the author of An Exaggerated Murder, and is famous on Twitter for having offered to tattoo himself if he sold 100 copies of Duck's Newburyport.
And we did.
And you did. Did you get the tattoo yet?
Not yet. I'm probably February. I'll get it done.
Yeah. Do you know what it's going to be?
Yeah. So the galley, which was obviously what I read, back in the springtime, had this nice little like target shooting duck. The old timey carnivals. There were the ding and you'd knock them down.
Yep.
So it had a duck icon like that. So I thought that would be good because it could be small and still evocative and still connect me to the book in an interesting way. Still have people ask about it, but probably less so than if it were just like a giant duck on my forearm or something.
It would be awesome. When you mentioned the galley, I thought for a minute you were going to say you're going to get the entire jacket copy tattooed on your back.
Oh, yeah.
I think you should.
Jacket copy was great.
Your game. Yeah, go hard. Yeah. Go all the way. I actually love that duck, that symbol from the galley too. I thought that was really like evocative and very good for the book. The cover they have now is fine too, though, obviously. So you guys are both huge fans of this.
Yes, I am. I actually finished it in October, a couple months ago. And totally loved it. Huge fan. I actually named it as my favorite book of the year on the BookRiot roundup.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that. This has got to be one of the best books I've read in years, for sure. So I totally agree with you. Did you review it for BookRiot too, or did you just include it in a roundup?
They don't do reviews.
Yeah,
like lengthy reviews.
Right.
I did, a paragraph.
Right.
So
yeah. So yeah, that counts.
Yeah. I've been writing about it and tweeting about it pretty much as much as I can.
Yes. And Josh, you read it. Did you get it at Winter Institute?
I wasn't at Winter Institute, but one of the other booksellers who works at Porter Square Books was there, and they saw the galley and they saw the description. And they said to themselves, "Well, there's exactly one person I know who would read a book like this." And so I read it probably like February to about June or so. So I was finished about June.
Wow. So yeah, it's a book that can take some time. And
I'm always juggling a number of different books because part of the job of a bookseller is knowing a lot of different books, and so I've got 3 or 4 or 8 going constantly. So.
That's yes. I have that same problem right now. Like the book that I'm editing, this thing, book that I want to read for fun, a book that's on submission, a book that like there's all like it's nonsense. My brain is nonsense. But alas. So
Yeah.
oh, sorry, Rebecca, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say I read it at about the rate of 20 pages a day or so while I was reading other books too. So yeah, it took me 2 months, not because it's a slow read at all, just because I finished a bunch of other books in that time too.
Yeah, I can imagine. It does lend itself to that though, I think, as well. It's like the kind of having her consciousness in those small doses every single day feels really rewarding as a reading experience.
It does, and I actually started rereading it slowly. I kind of just want to have it around all the time and like read a few pages every now and then, and just to kind of constantly be reading it.
Yeah,
that's my plan for the future.
It's kind of like it's not like this exactly, but there was a time a few years ago where a friend of mine and I were reading Finnegan's Wake for the year, and there's something similar to that experience where that book's much more like impenetrable without like a guide. Obviously, like you can't just read it and like get it. I don't know that you can get it no matter what, but there is something about how once you do lock into it, like having that experience every day, like 3 pages, is like really amazing. And seemed like a very, very cool thing to just kind of keep going back through because it doesn't really have any beginning, middle, or end
That's right.
whatsoever. Like absolutely opposed to that. But so how many? But you wait, Josh, you changed your thing too. So you have to sell 150 copies. You're going to do something, right?
Yeah. So now that we've got the tattoo settled, if we do 150 by the end of January, so this is also my book of the year. So It gets another staff pick bump in January. And so if we sell 150 by the end of January, myself and a few of the other booksellers at Porter Square Books and some of the baristas at the cafe who have read it and enjoyed it are going to make a short video. And I think we're going to do a dramatic something of the Mountain Lion storyline. So
that is so awesome.
I don't know what it's going to look like. In October, we did some portraying ourselves as Avengers and did some really cheesy, silly videos recommending books as like I was Thor, hence the, I just kept the beard, and we had a Scarlet Witch and we had a Loki and we had, a Captain Marvel. And so I think we can pull something off. It will at least be heartfelt, whatever it is, if we get there.
Do you know Nick Buzansky?
Not personally.
Formerly of Green Apple and Book Culture, and now working at Books Are Magic. When he was at Green Apple Books in San Francisco, he and Steven Sparks made a ton of like YouTube videos for their store and for recommendations. Some of them are really like very, very out there, very creative, very strange, and very fun. But you should, if you look them up, look up Green Apple Books, their YouTube channel, and you'll find like a ton of them. They had one whole series that was like the book versus the Kindle that got them a lot of attention.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
And then there's a lot of other ones too where they acted out different things. There's like when where supposedly Nick eats his shoe in a tree because of the Werner Herzog thing, and like there's all kinds of like wild stuff. But it's cool. It was like I think it did really well for them as a store, and it's a good idea that for a store to have that sort of presence. It makes it more than just a local bookstore into like something larger. I kind of dig that.
Yeah, definitely.
So let me ask you guys, what's your favorite aspect of this book? Do you have one, or what makes it your book of the year? If you had to nail that down to like 1 or 2 elements.
I think the humor in part, just the range of tones. I mean, in this section that we read today, I was laughing through it, but it's so heart-wrenching too, so the way she goes back and forth constantly, like the range of emotion, that's part of it. And I just think that the narrator is a great companion. I love spending time with her. I love thinking about her ideas. And the way that the book contains everything, politics, the environment, motherhood, friendship, family, etc., on and on. It kind of has the whole world in it.
There's almost nothing that I don't end up talking to someone about just randomly and being like, oh yeah, there's a thing in Ducks that references this. Like, right down to like the part in this one about the solar eclipse. I took my kids to the solar eclipse.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah, in Kentucky. We went to very specific to this one KOA and Land of the Lakes in Kentucky, where it was right where the total eclipse line was happening, and got to experience that. So and the next eclipse in 2024 goes right through Rochester. So the second I hit that, I was like, hell yeah, I'm down.
That's awesome. The line that I repeated to my husband today was something about how kids are drunk, like young kids.
Oh my God, I was going to be my line of the week.
Yes, I can't find it now, but it's perfect.
I've got it here somewhere. It really is. So you are a mother. You have one child.
Yes,
just one.
One child, and he's 6, almost 7.
Oh, okay.
So he's in that constantly drunk stage for sure.
Oh yeah. It only. Yeah, just wait. Then they turn 15 and they are drunk all the time.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah, it's on page 750. The fact that I think little kids essentially act drunk the whole time.
Yes.
Meryl Streep with all their rambunctiousness and mischief and confusion and their fits of crying. The fact that, what about my fits of crying? The fact that adults need caffeine, drugs, booze, and bad news just to act even a little bit like kids. It's great. This section. So Josh, what's your thing that you hone in on or that you most appreciate?
Okay, the big picture thing is the respect Elman shows to her narrator. I mean, this is a figure, the woman working at home, the mother working at home is a figure that doesn't get a lot of respect, both in literature and in politics and in history, and that we get essentially her thoughts unedited. I think is a real respect for this character that you've created and are bringing into the into literature. I remember kind of early on, one of the reactions that I had was, "Well, that's a really well stocked chest freezer," and there's just that is important to this character, and it makes sense why this would be important to this character. I'm excited that my chest freezer is well stocked, and Elman does a great job of these little details, constantly affirming this character. Often, in opposing the character's own self-denigrations. She'll think about how she can't remember anything, and then she'll this very vividly remember and describe something from her childhood. And Elman doesn't mount a defense attorney defense of her ability. She just shows us this person's brain for 1,000 pages. And I mean, that is it's that term respectful. That is an inherently respectful term, and that really hooked me. And I just kind of wanted to see how she moved that through this story arc. One of the things that I've grown to really enjoy is how much people seem to get wrong about the book. Like even people who are trying to say really nice things about it. So like I've heard a lot of people describe it as plotless.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. There's in fact a very traditional plot. You just have to be in the character's mind to see it. And there are also lots of sentences. The mountain lion is all regular length sentences, and even I would argue that her thoughts move in sentences too, even if there isn't a period. She just uses the phrase "the fact that" as the kind of grammatical unit to say this thought has ended and the next thought has begun.
Yeah. Did either of you ever read Zone by Matthias Enard?
No.
So when we did that book back in that book, a book that FYI should have been one of the best translations of the decade on all those stupid lists and all the bookstore displays. And yes, I did say that, and I'll leave that public. But it absolutely should be. It's a far superior translation to the other Enard translations that have come out. But it is one sentence too, in the way that this is. But then the guy is on a train. And it's exactly 518 pages for the 518 kilometers he travels on the train. But it uses those same ticks of like there could be M dash or a semicolon, and it's got a very clear like train rhythm to it. So it's one sentence, quote unquote, but there's many sentences within that. They're just not periods. As if period is the only way to form a sentence, there's other ways to like get to a sentence like structure, like you're saying. And then within that book too, there's a bit of a cheat where like he reads a book, and that book is written in normal sentence structure for like 20 pages. So you see, but then it goes back into the thing. But when we brought that out, like the Chicago Tribune claimed that it was the longest one-sentence book in history, which is like maybe a lie that I may have planted to them to try and get attention for it, and it worked. Like it really worked.
It is a good hook. It is a I'm holding this gigantic book. Why should I pick it up? Well, it's really just one sentence. So then you flip through and dig in, and and now we're wondering, like, what is a sentence? Does a sentence need a period? And that's, but you got to get into the book to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a crazy thing that she had in that interview too, where the Observer claimed that it was 8 sentences, which I just don't know where that would have come from.
Yeah, no idea. The narrator has 1 sentence.
Yeah.
And lots of sentences for the mountain lion, but it does not add up to 8 in any way.
No.
It's very strange.
I've heard people describe the Molly Bloom soliloquy as 7 sentences. So I'm wondering if maybe they were there is a kind of post Molly Bloomness to this, which is one of the things that also hooked me. I immediately saw it as a, contemporary Molly Bloom, even though that's, as I learned more about the book and grew with it, I don't think that's entirely, I think that's less accurate than I first thought. But maybe that's just kind of, Molly Bloom was 7 sentences. Maybe there's something similar in here.
Yeah, that is true. That section is 7 sentences. I'm pretty sure you're right. Just for some reason I was thinking it was 5, but 7 sounds more accurate. It does remind me a bit of Ulysses, though. I've mentioned that on here a few times, that there are like certain comparison points. I mean, which isn't surprising given that her dad wrote the big bio on Joyce. I'm sure she's very, very well aware of Joyce's work and Ulysses. But there is something about like the kind of the timelessness of it. Like a lot of like the stream of consciousness parts of Ulysses have the same thing where it's like tied to a specific moment and yet feels universal and is completing out like a whole space and a whole city. And in this case, like a whole woman's life and everything that goes into that, both in her house and then outside as she's doing other things. So there's something to that.
I've been thinking about that comparison a lot, and I'm not sure what to make of it because this is a much easier read than Ulysses. I read Ulysses in college, and it was tough.
Yeah.
And I've heard it described as like Ulysses without any companion to go along with it. Like there's no book that explains this one. That I kind of I on the one hand, you don't need any explanation of this book, but on the other hand, I have not been. I did not use the index in the back of all the acronyms at all, and I haven't been looking at the glossary at the back, and I haven't been looking things up as I went along, and like maybe I would get more out of it if I did do some research, So am I kind of selling the book short a little bit by saying, oh, it's way easier, it's way less complicated. You don't need someone to help you with this.
I think on one of the first episodes, we made the comparison. It was kind of like the comparison of Ulysses is like a yin and yang situation. Like it's kind of connected by being almost the opposite in a way. Although it has like certain similarities, but there is like, it isn't trying to put in like the Joyce's famous quote about like writing things into the Ulysses so that professors will spend the next 100 years trying to find them. Like, I don't feel like that's the intent behind this, but it's got like everything in it in the same way. But there's certain things that make me think of it. But what you're saying about looking things up, this section I barely look things up too. Like I've been just reading it, and like if there's something that comes up a couple times, I'll usually look it up maybe. But a lot of times I'm like, oh, I get it from context, but I just don't know. And I know none of the movies basically except for Witness. The Witness is the one movie I've seen, and I don't think there's any of the others I've seen so far. And the ones in this chapter, I was like, I don't even know what this is. But that's fine. But the one that I looked up, the one thing was where it said cheeseburger emoji outcry. And I was like, what is this? What could this possibly be? Do you guys know what this is?
No,
I don't.
Oh, no, where is it?
This is amazing. So I missed this entirely, but I looked it up from her thing. And apparently so Apple has their emoji for a cheeseburger and the cheese is on top of the burger. But then Google did an emoji for their phones or whatever. And there's the burger and then the cheese on the bottom. And people were like, you don't put cheese on the bottom of a cheeseburger. That's ridiculous. And so they had to change it. It was like a controversy, a cheeseburger emoji controversy.
Oh my goodness.
The fact that okay, so that level, like the times I have looked things up, I've just been like, what is this like rare, like she'll have them all in caps, like those little sections in caps, as if they were like a headline on a blog. And so I'll just type that in exactly how she has it, and I'll find the story, and it'll be like some wild thing that you must have just come across and like set aside or marked to be able to use to put in here. So there is like a ton of stuff that I can imagine like 50 years from now is going to seem very strange to some young reader who is not alive when emojis were becoming a thing. Like they probably don't even have emojis. It'll be like reading Finnegan's Wake. They'll have to decipher through a key like what all these references might be to. Also, that's assuming we are alive in 50 years, but that's not certain.
Yeah, I think that send you, as you're saying, it can send you out into the world to learn all kinds of interesting stuff, and that would be a fun way to read it too, really slowly and kind of looking things up and exploring all the references. Yeah,
absolutely. What did you think, Rebecca, of the controversy around her comments about moms that was in the Guardian interview?
Yeah, well, I listened to your episode from last time, and basically I agree with your conclusions, although I do understand why people were upset with her, with her statement that moms are basically going to be out of commission for 20 years, more or less. I mean, people were definitely taking her out of context.
Yeah.
When you look at the context of the whole interview and of her work, she's saying something much more complicated, but I understand the impulse to be upset by that. Like, you should read the whole thing before you criticize her. But, mothers are concerned that they're going to be dismissed because it's hard to be a mother, and, you're going to be busy, and you might have mom brain, and you might just, quote unquote, you might just quit because you want to stay home with your kids, so that's what they're reacting to, I think. But Lucy Ellman's point is also important, that motherhood is really hard. Mothers need more support than what they have. I think what you all said about it last week was good. I feel sympathy for people who are criticizing her. I just think that they're misunderstanding what Ellman was doing.
I agree. Yeah. And the thing was, I didn't see a lot of moms criticizing her. I saw a lot of men criticizing her. And that might have just been myself, like whatever my Twitter timeline is providing me with. But the majority of things that I saw were from men.
Interesting.
And then there'd be women's comments underneath their comments, but they were like doubly out of context because they had like the quote from the dude criticizing her that wasn't in context, and then they're talking about that quote without having gone back to the source. So the whole thing was weird. I just thought it was like dumb. But there is a section in this part for us that's very close to what she says there. On 736, is this the same one you're thinking of?
Yes.
The fact that one thing for sure, whatever you do, it's not enough. And make one mistake and you've had it. Nap euphoria, because everybody thinks they can threaten and criticize and mom shame you on TV, in books, at PTA meetings, online, and even at the supermarket. Jake with no shirt on. The fact that they all think they know better. I don't know, but they know. Like how your kids will be traumatized by this or that. Too much or too little attention. Exercise, food, medicine, clothing, shelter, hobbies, friends, everything. But what if it's the other way around, and it's us moms that are traumatized, shell-shocked, damaged, starved, downtrodden by everything we got to do, this huge thankless task. The fact that I think it sends some moms off their rockers, most moms maybe, and the fact that, let's face it, most of us are in terrible shape. PTSD, PMT, HRT, HIPPA, galoshes, blah, blah, blah.
I actually tagged that one as well. In some ways, this is one of the ways to read this as an act against mom shame. You know, this idea, and not by saying that people don't make mistakes, not by saying that everyone is perfect, or that it doesn't put the act of motherhood on a pedestal, but it's just acknowledging that it is difficult, and acknowledging that difficulty can make you have second thoughts, can make you wonder if you've done the right thing, and will have impacts beyond, when they're in college, after you've done all the hardest stuff. It's this idea that, again, it goes back to that respect, this idea that it is okay to feel these things.
Yeah.
Many people have. Probably everyone, all of us have known someone who has felt these things in various different ways. I mean, it took me a very long time to see this, but I see a lot of my mom in her as well.
Mm-hmm.
This anxiety that is a constant presence in her life is something I think is a constant present in my mother's life.
Yeah.
And, you act against shame by being open and honest and sharing it, rather than kind of hiding it and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I totally agree. And being a dad is very different from being a mom, I know. But like the sort of judgmental parts of it that come up from outside are very prevalent. And I can't imagine how much stronger that is if you're a mom, and like how much more that can be like dismissive or critical or hurtful in a way that I think is really bad.
As the mother here, yes. I think that's true. I think that's true. Yes. And I appreciate this book for that.
Yeah, me too. That's the section I want to talk about the most. I'll tell you guys one story first. So like the other day I had the baby, I have 3 kids, which are killing. I'm broken too. Because of that. They're all impossible. Then the youngest one, so there's 15-year-old, 12-year-old, and then a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old I take into to the grocery store, and he had like his jacket on with like a hood, and he kept pulling the hood off, and so I was carrying him in. I was like, fuck it, I don't care, just like don't have a hood on, I don't care. We're walking like 20 feet into the store, and some lady stopped her car, unrolled her window, and she's like, you need to have a hat on him. I was like, look, I don't know, man. Like, wow. I can't control everything right now. I'm giving up. And I feel like that's a weird, that sort of reaction is weird and out of place, but I feel like it's much more prevalent for moms in a lot of ways. Like, or at least the fear of that.
Yeah, I think so. But, my husband would relate to what you're saying. He's had people look at him like, oh my God, do you know what you're doing? Can you really take care of that child? Yeah. So there's judgment there, but it's of a different sort. And I think it's less intense.
This section, the beginning part of this section, like 700 through 710 or 715, like was wrecking me when I was reading it, because it's so intense about like the bit with her mom where it all starts. Is it this one? Yeah, where she talks about how the fact that maybe I even told her I loved her, though we weren't that sort of family. The fact that I think I often longed to tell her but didn't dare. The fact that maybe I dared to say it out loud that day because it just seemed so necessary and right and wonderful. And all I remember is she was sort of short with me, kind of cold, and I still don't know why. I never will know why. The fact that by this time I was old enough to ask her, it seemed too late. The fact that I didn't think she'd remember it anyway, and I didn't want to make her feel bad about it. And it's all about this one day that it kind of keeps coming back to, of coming downstairs and being like the happiest that she'd been and wanting to share this happiness with her mom, and her mom being like not fully there for it. And like that sticks with her in her memory, 40 years later. And like, I think this section's so intense for that. And she goes through the idea that like, we don't know what we're doing wrong. And like my kids, I know I'm not there for all the time. And she's saying this as a character, like, I know I'm not there all the time either. And I wonder what things they're going to hold on to, years from now and relate to. And that was fucking me up pretty much reading it. I was like, yeah, oh no. Now I've got so much anxiety. And it reminded me of my mom, like, cause my mom's super anxiety ridden, like so bad.
Yeah, I have this section tagged a couple different places too. I think you stopped reading a little before that, but I think she says this was the first time we seemed separate, completely separate. This is when she realized that she and her mom weren't the same person. And I mean, this is one of the fundamental coming of age things that most of us, I don't think, remember. When we really finally learn that we are individuals and that we are not that we're a family, but that's not a unity in some way. This ends up being one of there's this memory, there's the Ducks Newburyport memory, and there's one of the memories from when her mother was sick. I think are kind of the three kind of key character points from her childhood, from her youth and childhood that really, but I think this is the most she spends on a single memory in one chunk. It's almost the 3 full pages on this one memory, and most of the time she doesn't do that. There are the breaks in a little bit, but it's a uniquely focused passage, and I think that speaks to the importance of that discovery of separateness in her and our lives.
There's so much in this section about how we don't understand each other.
Yeah.
And she says with Leo too, let me see. She says, the fact that you never know when you might be crushing your kid, the fact that when you fall in love, you think at last somebody knows you, understands you, cares about you in every way like your mom did. And they do sometimes. The fact that Leo loves me and always cares how I'm feeling and wants to hear what I have to say. The fact that even he can't predict what I'm about to feel, though. And sometimes he doesn't get what I'm talking about. So stop reading there. But it's the question of, like, can anybody understand you? And if your mother and your husband don't fully get you, then nobody does.
Yeah, that you stopped right before the 2 lines that I like or 2 of the lines I like the most from this bit was the fact that it was harder to share euphoria than I'd realized, even with the person you love most. And then right at the end of what you read, the fact that I think I could tell him, Leo, if I was feeling euphoric though, and he'd be pleased. And that seemed like a really good, that's like a fascinating way to think about like a positive, loving relationship, is that you can share your euphoria with that person and they get it. I think that was very powerful to me too. I did find this is. Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, I think that's what I mean by the tonal variety here. She can go from utter devastation that her mother didn't recognize the euphoria. She talks about how my whole life would be different if she had recognized it. And that's on the same page as where she talks about Leo getting her euphoria. You know, it's just that amazing range of feeling.
Mm-hmm. I just found there's one other kid part that I had marked that was related to what we were talking about. It's on 749. The fact that kids keep reducing your life down to basics, to popsicles. The fact that nobody ever tells people that, like when they're deciding whether to have kids or not. The fact that nobody tells you how endless and boring and silly it is. And the fact that just getting a kid out the front door every morning is a major achievement and quite an ordeal, a traumatic event.
Endless and boring and silly is just like such an amazing 3, because it's totally different words. You almost never see them together, and certainly not in that order. I mean, some things that are boring can feel endless. Some things but it's hard to be boring and silly.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be endless and silly too. But somehow this experience is those things.
Yeah. It very much is. What did you guys make out of so there's a lot of the mother-daughter stuff at the beginning that we're just talking about in relation between her and her mother. But then when she gets into Stace and the Stacy, there's the part where she talks about how Stacy's watching South Pacific. And she's like, that sucks. But at least she's watching musicals, blah, blah, blah. And then she asks her why she's watching musicals. And she's like, well, I don't like them. But I'm doing it. Yeah, then why watch them? And she looked me right in the eye and said, to see how they make me feel, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I said, well, how do they make you feel? And her answer was that I'm not white. I wonder what you guys thought of her relationship to Stacy, to their whole context and all the musical stuff. Because it's one thing that I'm becoming more and more curious about as I'm reading this for the first time.
Well, that was another really devastating moment. And then she follows it up, saying that she's devastated. The fact that I'm just devastated by that, the fact that it really cuts me to the quick, the fact that I didn't know what to say, my knees went wobbly, the fact that I had no idea she was worrying about stuff like that. Stacy is just having experiences that the narrator cannot relate to, and she feels helpless. And that's really moving.
Yeah.
I relate a lot to the narrator, but I also kind of, in some ways, relate to Stacy, having been a miserable unpleasant, horrible teenager myself.
Yeah.
I'm surprised sometimes at the narrator not. Well, the narrator wasn't like that herself. Like, she didn't have the chance to be a bratty teenager because her mother was sick.
Right.
Right. So yeah, so she never had that experience, and I think so she doesn't recognize it in Stacy. It seems what Stacy is going through seems very recognizable, relatable to me, at
Yeah.
least. So yeah, that makes me think the narrator doesn't really understand it because she had such a strange teenage experience herself. And she
Right.
talks about that in this section, how when her mother got sick, she just kind of basically shut down.
Yes. Went numb and
Yeah.
stopped feeling entirely. Yeah. That's interesting. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was going to say that one of the things that's fascinating is that there was this kind of shadow novel of Stacy's, kind of where at the beginning and then where we see her at the end, which I know, but I won't spoil it.
Yeah, I do too.
And
Thank you.
What's interesting is about that is this is a very obviously interior novel. It is in someone's head, but we are all still our own heads are all kind of moving around in the world. There is also an exterior, and so there are lots of ways that this novel looks at the other stories that are happening in the world around her. There's a story with Leo. We now in this section learn about a trauma that her friend Kathy endured. So Kathy clearly has, a character arc. There's Ronnie, who shows up every now and again, and he's obviously active in some way in this community. And you again, you're kind of how we can be wrong about a book. This is a stream of consciousness novel, but it is still a plot-driven novel. It's just we don't get to see all of the plot in the way we do with a traditional narrative.
Interesting. Yeah. We were trying on one of the earlier episodes, we talked about that book, Meander, Spiral, Explode, and like how the patterns that run throughout this being the way that it constructs that sort of plot, or it constructs a sense of plot. But I'm curious now. I feel like there's still like things, like I know what you're saying, but I feel like until I finish it, there's some of the overall image of the structure and what the plot would be is still mysterious.
Yeah, it is. I was chatting with this on another podcast where I was a bookseller guest. I guess I do this now.
Nice.
And it's a pretty traditional plotline. It's a pretty traditional rising action, crisis, receding action. You just don't expect it, and because of we all read with our expectations, and so we see these big blocks of text, and we expect Thomas Bernard or someone who's just like, I am not going to tell you a story, and in fact I'll make you hate the idea of a story.
Right.
Whereas this does something entirely different. Like this is, if you kind of plotted out everything that happened, you can see the rising action, you can see the crisis, you can see actually how other scenes earlier in the book kind of foreshadow what happens, which is, I think, one of the greatest scenes in fiction, definitely for this year and maybe for the last couple of decades. I can't wait to hear what you all think and say about it when we're
getting there. Close. We only have 3 episodes left after this one. So and they're going to be coming like real fast, which I'll update everyone at the end. But something as you're saying that, when you mentioned Bernhard, and this relates to what you said earlier, Rebecca, is that this book is much more inviting than a lot of those. So like it's more inviting than Ulysses. It's more inviting than Bernhard, obviously, or anyone else who's doing these sort of like longer unbroken paragraphs. It's more inviting than Crash and Horkai. And that is how it's different. And like how you don't need to look everything up or like feel like I don't feel intimidated reading this book in a way. Like I don't feel like she's a genius, and it's such a good, solid genius. It's not like she's trying to show you she's a genius over and over again. It's just there.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is not intimidating at all. And I've liked the conversation you had, I don't know if it was last time or a couple times ago, about how the bad news, like the darker moments of this book are mixed in, with funny moments, and that makes it so much easier to handle. Like going into this, I really have a hard time thinking about climate change, having a kid, and it just like causes major levels of anxiety, and I don't really want to read about it, and maybe I should, and maybe it would make me feel better if I read more
I've got a book
about
for you
it.
coming in September that will make you feel better.
Okay, all right. Maybe I should read that. But so when I was reading, the passages early on in this one about climate change, I thought, oh my God, I don't know if I can handle this. but it was okay, because she does come back to funny moments. There's so much variety in here that I've been okay with it.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Like it's not, yeah, it's there lurking. I've been on this like Shirley Jackson kick since the summer, because someone had recommended Hangs a Man as in relation to one of the books that we're publishing in the spring, Sarah Mesa's 4x4. And I read Hangs a Man while I was on like this vacation and was like, book is amazing. I started reading like all these early Shirley Jackson books I didn't really even know existed. And then I realized I never read The Lottery. I've read The Lottery, but not the whole collection, right? Like that one story has been excerpted a million times. In anthologies everywhere. So I started reading the full thing yesterday at the gym. And the first story is about a young girl who's in high school, and her parents are having a party. And one of the drunk guys comes out and talks to her in the kitchen. He's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, I'm doing my homework. My homework is to write about the future of the world. And the future of the world is everything's going to get flooded. Everything will be destroyed. You guys fucked this all up by being so like self-centered. And you did, and hopefully there won't be any more education, because like, after the world ends like this, we don't need people to be educated like you guys were, because all you did was make mistakes." And I was like, this story could have been written in 2019 and appear in the New Yorker, and I'd be like, wouldn't even thought twice about it.
She's even more of a genius than I thought.
She's incredible. Those stories are creepy. The Kathy thing was interesting here too, because like it was one of the times that it occurred to me that the way that she unveils like a story plot is very condensed and has a God, I hate to do this because we keep referencing different male writers in some way or another, but it has a pinch and sort of aspect where it tells you the end before you get to understand what the beginning was. So she's like, talks about getting off the phone with Kathy and how upsetting it was and how she can't believe that this happened. You're like, what is going on? And then like slowly but surely over like the next 4 pages, you get to like this scene. And I don't even think it was clear to me. I might have just missed something, but it wasn't clear to me of reading it, like who was getting shot at, why. Was it like a random thing? Was it something? And then as it comes clear that it was like her friend's ex-husband or lover, whatever, ex-guy comes and shoots at Sydney and then and kills her friend. And the way that it's told is like almost in reverse. Like you get her reaction to it and then sort of backtrack into what the details are. And I thought that it is so condensed in there and such a impactful thing that ties into all the other parts of like the open carry guys, all the like the fear of guns and of violence and all those different ways. And it's really intense, like how that's plotted into there.
I have a question.
Do
you, as we go through the book, do you think that these stories, yes, it is short and condensed, but do you think that they're getting longer? Like, I feel like in the beginning of the book, there was more listing and moved through ideas more quickly. And in this section, she dwells on some things longer than she was earlier.
That's interesting. I wonder, so that, I think like that does seem true. Like I have to go back and look to see. That's something like one of the things with this book is that you could, even though it doesn't require like a companion book to understand it per se, you could write a million different theses on this book. Like there's a bunch of stuff that you could look into and do. But what you're saying rings true to me, because I remember at the beginning feeling like there were just a lot of references, like the bee at bread loaf, the whatever. It would just be like all the little nuggets without like a clear explanation of what they were. And that this section really does seem to slow down, but it almost feels like like similar to that the Meander Spiral Explode book, where like it's one of these patterns as it gets caught in like kind of an eddy for a moment and like stops going forward so fast. And that might be, I would assume that's a very deliberate on her part of like when to focus or let things sort of gestate there on the page rather than just moving full ahead with like just the little references. But I think you're right. Like it seems like that.
It was about, again, the problem with comparing her to another male writer. It was about this time, maybe a little bit before her, where I realized that this is at least as much Proust as it is Joyce.
Oh, yeah.
And there is, and which is, it's dumb to not notice it because she talks about her memory all the time.
She talks about Madeline's.
Yeah, she does.
In this section.
Yes, in this section. Chocolate dip Madeline's, yeah.
Yep.
And it, in some ways, I think it's, what this problem means is the writer we're really not seeing is Gertrude Stein, who was also able to do that difficult but approachable, that kind of shallow surface, but then this bottomlessness beneath it that she could do with Tender Buttons.
Or Making Americans, which is really, really strong equivalent to this in a way.
And it's just interesting that Proust has that movement too. It's just his scale is across the 7 volumes rather than the 8,000 pages or whatever it ends up being, rather than the mere 1,000 we have with us today. But it does seem, she does seem to hit a bunch of the different major modernist techniques and seems to land them all from what I can tell. And it also does something different. There's a Mrs. Dalloway aspect to this. Yes. Too. Much earlier, she's really nervous about a cocktail party that she's supposed to throw. But then that gets canceled, so it's fine.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of The Waves, too. Virginia Woolf keeps coming up in my mind as I read it as well, because of those, because especially The Waves of this kind of, like the way that it does build up into like a crescendo and then like sort of backs away from itself and then moves back into that and like keeps kind of flowing through. Like there's something to the rhythm of The Waves in my, very corrupted memory. But that reminds me of this book where it's like picks up pace at times and lays back at times and has those, like what you're saying, Rebecca, about all the different tones, like all the different things are in there. And that it's an amazing book.
That's what I was thinking about earlier with the Ulysses comparison. Like this book doesn't seem to need a companion to it, except that we've been asking for one in a whole bunch of different ways. You can benefit from it.
Who's going to be the first
Ulysses
person
didn't have a companion its first year out.
Who's going to put together the collection of essays of like 20 different approaches to Duck's Newburyport? Some burgeoning academic who happens upon this podcast and hears those words should just do this. Like, I think there's a lot of different readers that we've talked to on the podcast or elsewhere. I've seen on Twitter, because I follow all the Twitters talk about it. There's a lot of people that are very smart that have very different approaches or different things that they would like look at or focus on in this book, and it's all in there. And so it would be great to have like, a bunch of different essays about different aspects of this. Like you're saying, the sense of the story, the narrative, the how it is a plotted book. That would be a great essay for a collection of essays on Duck's Newburyport. I think
only we knew a publisher.
Yeah, if only we knew. Yeah, well, the times I try to get books published does not work out well. So like, we're gonna let that ride.
Well, I will totally buy and read that book and all those books.
I would too. I'm
actually reading this book. It's going to come out in, I guess, in January, called the Ferrante Letters. I think that's what it's called. It's critics writing about the Neapolitan novels, but it's 4 of them. It's like, well, and they're writing each other letters about it, and they're writing about it personally, but also, academically, and they're critiquing it and interpreting, all the books, and I love it, and it's great, and I want that kind of book about Duck's Newburyport.
Yeah, me too. You should do this.
Yeah, I haven't done anything academic in a couple decades. We'll see. Okay, a decade.
I feel like a book about this book doesn't need to be overtly super academic. That it could be much more reader friendly. But I feel like there'd be an audience for it, and I feel like there'd be a lot of people who would have lots of interesting things to contribute.
Well, maybe I'll just pitch it to Columbia University Press and see how it goes.
Do it. Do it. Because you could have authors instead of like I have this is going back, but Pynchon is one of my obsessions. And I read Against the Day recently, and I have a book of essays on Against the Day that I've been reading here and there. And it's just like, it's mostly academics, and it is fine. They're all really interesting. perspectives and that open up that book a little bit to me. But I would like, for something like this, I feel like you could have authors, booksellers, academics, other readers. Like, it wouldn't have to be a purely academic book. This book opens up to like a lot of other options. And I feel like you should have moms, just a regular mom, who's a reader. That would be awesome. I would love that. I would read all of those.
There is no such thing as a regular mom, but you're right. Various mom perspectives I would listen to.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Good point. But yeah, like I'm very pro mom. And I think it would be cool. I think it would be cool to have something like that, because I think there is a lot of different options that you could pull out of this.
Well, I have to say, I've been critiquing in my mind all of your pro mom comments.
Oh yeah, I'm
over
sure.
this series. Yeah.
So what's give me your hot critique and.
Well, it's just assuming that they're all the same, and that's really what I meant by saying there's no regular mom. Like there is there is no such thing as the mom that anybody could recognize, and like there's so many differences and so many different kinds, and can't generalize.
Okay, yeah, that's totally fair. It's all started like one night when I was talking to Kaya and Anthony about how everyone that I think of as a good friend happens to be a mom, and that there's something about like people who are my friends who tend to be female and tend to have kids, and I find them like I'm very like good friends with them, and I think that there's something to that I was like, I don't know what it is, but there's like a different sense of being in the world by being a mom that is very relatable and that I really appreciate. And I hadn't really thought through appreciating it in that way before. But that it didn't exclude, like, it wasn't meant to like either make all moms one mom, or say that that people who don't have kids don't count. But there was just something about like this affinity that I had for like a number of people over like a short period of time. And I was like, man, the one thing they all have in common is that they're all moms and they all think like in a different way that I really appreciate, or they have like a different perspective on the world I really appreciate. That's where it all came from.
Yeah, and sure, that's your personal experience. That's great.
But it wasn't as crazy sounding as it probably sounds out of context.
Yeah. No, I understand.
It was much more just like, hey, you know what? I'm so kind of cool. I'm still getting enough attention.
Well, that statement I will totally agree with. Yeah. And enough of the right kind of attention. How about that? And support. Support
for sure. Support for sure. Like, yeah. I don't know. There's lots of things I could say, but I'm not going to. Anyway, so what else do you guys want to say about this section? Wait, actually, let's follow it up. What other criticisms do you have of the 2-month review so far for this season?
My only criticism, I really enjoyed listening to it. My only criticism is that you could have had more women on.
I know.
So I'm glad to be here. So thank you for inviting me. And that's really it. Other than that, I've enjoyed it. I really haven't listened to previous seasons. It's my first time, just because I didn't read the books. Although I do want to read Monster Human.
It's great.
Yeah, really I think I like that one. But yeah, that's my only criticism, and otherwise I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was a problem that I tried to address in a few different ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was absolutely on my mind as well. Monster Human, I think, has far more female guests, actually. A lot of these, I don't think you need to read the book to listen to them, because they recap it so, in cases where the plot is more central in a very definable way, they get recapped so much more like TV shows, where you could just be like, oh, I didn't, I missed it, but I could get it. Like, there's not really it's not like a different thing. But yeah, they're all like, well, that's a fair and valid criticism, and I hope you do listen to Monster Human, because I think you'll like it, and I think you'll like that book.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's pretty wild, and Hussey came on at the end and really like made that whole season really something special. So it's cool. It's fun. That book was fun to do.
I do think you should ask Lucy Ellman to be on. Or
I'm
maybe
scared.
it's too late at this point. I know, but I'm scared to be here right now. You should do it.
Okay, I will DM her after this podcast and just see if she's willing to come on whenever. We can do it as a bonus episode because we're not going to do anything in January. We're going to take a month off, which this will sort of segue into wrapping this up. But we will be taking a month off in January because I need to get to work on a different project, and I can't do both at once. But then we'll be back in February with The Dreamed Part by Rodrigo Frazan. This is the very first season that we ever did was for The Invented Part to work through that. So now the second volume of the trilogy has come out. So we'll be doing that in February. So anyone who's listening that wants to follow along, order a copy. If you use the code 2month, I'll make sure that that's on, that's set up so that you can get a discount through our website. But you can get it at Porter Square Books. You can get it at any bookstore, any independent bookstore that you want. That would be better. But I'll make sure that there's something set up so you can get it through our website. I forgot what I was going to say, but that's going to be the next. That'll be season 11 after our break. Did you guys have like a favorite line from this section? We usually try and end with our favorite lines. I had 20 of them, so someone else could go first.
I got one idea and one line that were my favorite. When she's thinking about trees and how she finds out that trees communicate and have relationships, and she wonders if they sleep, and then she wonders, of course, if they dream. And the idea of what tree dreams could be like is just so enrapturing to me. Like I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about it, but it's just such a beautiful, resonant potential. There's just so much potential in that little image. Then, of course, she just goes on because we're just following her along. I just love that image. And I think it's one that's, I feel like literature is working towards something like that, you know? I don't know, maybe Sparks knows of a book that's coming out that's about tree dreams. If anyone does. And then the line 717, when she's thinking about how she never had the facts of life talk with her mom, and the fact that I think it was a deliberate effort to avoid giving Jill the facts of life. She's remembering how she heard it from her friend Jill, and she heard it wrong. And so the fact that I think it was a deliberate effort to avoid giving Jill the facts of life, a cowardly bit of misinformation, which now I can totally sympathize with. A cowardly bit that I can totally sympathize with.
So good. Rebecca, do you have a favorite line?
I have a bunch. I'll read one passage, and I have a galley, and then my page numbers are different from yours.
Oh, that's
like 14 pages off. So I'll just read it. And this is kind of grim, but I'm thinking about this because she writes a lot in this section about community and cooperation amongst people, and also animals and trees. And here she's writing about humans cooperating. The fact that people say human beings are basically benevolent because when things like Hurricane Katrina happen, everybody gets together and helps each other out. And this proves that we're basically a cooperative species. The fact that I hope they're right, but while the Nazis helped each other out a lot too, and IBM helped them out some more, the fact that the Nazis all got together as a community and exterminated a bunch of people, the fact that, boy, did they cooperate smoothly on that, collabo, the fact that lynch mobs are good at cooperating too, mob rule and mobs cooperate fine, the fact that a whole bunch of Hindus beat a Muslim to death in India for stealing cows, and when the police came, all they did was arrest some more Muslims for stealing cows, concentration camps, rape, WMDs, witch hunts, the fact that being a cooperative species can either be a success or a failure.
That I have both of those marked as well. Exactly. So in the finished copy, it's 743, 744. That last line is amazing.
It is. I love that joke throughout this book, like such and such can either be a success or a failure, like how ridiculous it is to say that.
Yeah.
But just in this context, it's a really complicated thing to say.
Yeah.
true, ridiculous, horrifying, all at once.
Yeah.
Like, the humanity can either be a success or a failure. We'll see how it turns out.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That's one of those heavy moments in this where then she has to get out of it a little bit.
And her it's so funny because the next line is the fact that my itch is gone. Like this deep dive into this like fundamental existential horror that follows humanity. At least it got her itch gone. Like she distracted her enough from whatever was causing it. That's gone. She got something out of it. And the tartlets were a success. It's such a
so true.
But they never feel jarring. I mean, that is radically jarring, and it doesn't feel jarring in the moment. You just kind of flow right along with it.
I feel like that's because the narrator is so believable as a character in a way. Like it's so well done that it does seem believable. I don't know. I agree with you. That line is incredible. The one I've marked so many, and we've gone over so many of them. I'll just go with this one because I thought this was really touching. The fact that actually, if I had 3 wishes, I would go back in time and go be in Evanston with Mommy and Pepito before my heart operation, then spend more time with Mommy and Daddy in my 20s and really get a chance to talk. And then I do all the things over again with Stace, but better, and make her happy this time. I thought that was like an interesting, that very much fit like the pattern I was finding of like the narrator's consciousness, where like when she has a chance for 3 wishes, it's these 3 wishes to go back and like do things with another human in a different way. Like it seemed really powerful to me. So Rebecca, where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Of Books and Bites, and on Instagram as well. That's mostly where I hang out.
Awesome. And they can read you on BookRiot.
That's right.
You did most recently is the Indie Press Roundup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that every month where I write about a handful of small and independent press books that I really loved. So awesome. a link to my author page is on my Twitter bio. So find me at Of Books and Bikes on Twitter. And
then go from there and read everything.
Exactly.
Did you like the young Moon book, 7 Samurai?
Oh yes. That was a lot of fun.
I met him in Korea with Will. We were all on a trip together.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, he's super cool. I taught his book in my class a few years ago. But I haven't read this one. I gave the copy that we had to one of my students, and they wrote a book review of it. So.
Oh, good.
I don't have it.
Yeah, I need to read more of his books. That's the only one I've read. But yeah, I was really into it.
One of the ones, the novel that, this is getting off topic, but the novel that Delkey brought out, I think is my favorite. But it might be because it hits a little close to home. So there might be personal reasons for it, of like a sort of middle-aged dude with like fear of health problems kind of thing. But like I think he's really talented. Like, and no matter what he does, it's all very, very good. And Josh, where can people find you?
I'm mostly on Twitter, at In Order of Import. I'm also a lot of the Porter Square Books' voice online. Not all of it. Big fans would be able to tell when it's me and not me. So that's mostly where I am at the moment. And I've still got some reviews and stuff, and a few things coming out here and there. LA Review of Books, Lit Hub.
Nice.
I'll tweet them when they happen.
And what's your novel about?
My kind of one sentence is I think of it as a skewed detective novel. So it starts like the detective novels always do, with blood on the carpet and a missing millionaire. But as the story progresses, it gets less and less like a detective novel is supposed to go, and gets more and more about how we know things, what is the value of information, what can we learn from some of these tropes of trying to have certainty. And I also hope it's funny. I definitely wrote some jokes. Whether people laugh at them, I'm not sure, but I definitely put them in there. So I hope it's also a funny, all of that, plus you laugh too.
So I'll link to it in the show notes from Porter Square, where people should just go and order it.
Correct.
And
And I'll sign
they have a
it.
signed copy. Yeah. It says signed copy. I'm going to order it tonight. Very cool. Thank you both for coming on here. This is really fun.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. And next week we're going to go through a bunch of things really quick. So on Wednesday, we'll have another episode, which, because I don't have Brian here, I don't have the thing. I think I'll put it in the show notes, but we go up to page 800 and something. And I believe next Sunday or Saturday, we will have another episode. So there'll be 3 this week. And then the final one will be on December 29th, and we'll finish the entire book before the end of the year. So if you're following along, there's a link in the show notes to the full schedule, and it's fine. But okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hold on one second.